Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Sister or long-awaited child is the question. Today's story has a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. Sometimes in life, everything seems so perfect that you start to wonder if it's one of those too good to be true scenarios you hear about. You hear about a perfect marriage destroyed by betrayal, a couple shattered by the death of a family member, or a marriage that breaks down after the loss of a child. You hear about it, but you never think it will happen to you. I'm here to tell you that the likelihood of this happening is not as low as it seems. My life has been great. I was married to the most beautiful, wonderful, kind, and caring woman I had ever met. I had a great job in a field that I considered my hobby, and we had just built our dream home on a semi-rural lot outside the city. I even remember thinking when we moved into the house that it seemed too perfect. It must have been the universe sending me one of those premonitions. John, your life is too good. You are not allowed to be so happy when half the remaining population lives in poverty and misery. My name is John Smith. Pretty common name, right? It suits me. I'm interested in sports. I live and breathe sports so much that it is my job. No, I'm not an athlete, although I'm in good shape. I'm a sports analyst. I have my own podcast. I've recently appeared on some smaller sports programs, and I work for a fairly well-known fantasy sports website as a statistician. I deal with numbers and forecasts, give advice, perform analytics, and conduct all kinds of analyses. It's quite difficult, but this is my hobby, and I get paid for it. I'm also lucky in love. I met Shannon in my senior year of college. We met completely by chance, and if not for this chance encounter, I doubt that we would have ever found each other. On a rare occasion, I decided to go play mini-golf with friends on a random weekend. I had never played mini-golf before. Shannon had a summer job there. She looked so out of place that I almost laughed. She was amazing, not the kind of girl you'd expect to see behind the counter at a little mini-golf course. I never thought I could get such beauty, so any nervousness I usually felt around women was non-existent with Shannon. I playfully flirted with her, paid for my round, and moved on with my friends. As I returned the equipment and was about to leave, I felt her hand on mine. Looking back at her, I noticed she had placed a small piece of paper in my hand, giving me a shy smile. I clenched my fist, looked at her one more time, and walked out the door feeling on top of the world. When a girl like that pays attention to you, it's a huge ego boost. Of course, her phone number was written on that piece of paper. I would love to tell you about our first date and subsequent romance, but alas, that's not what I'm here for. I assure you it was like a dream. We fell in love pretty quickly, and within a year, I decided to ask her if she wanted to marry me. Our love was almost perfect. I say almost because, well, no couple is perfect, and also because there was one serious problem between us, not a problem that threatened to tear us apart as I thought, but a problem nonetheless, her family. Shannon had loving parents and a younger sister. They were everything to her. In my entire life, I have never seen such a close-knit nuclear family. So why was this a problem? It's complicated, but to simplify things, I would say this: I think she loved them too much. It still sounds stupid, doesn't it? How can loving your family members too much be a problem? During the first year of our courtship, I thought I was incredibly lucky. I had this incredible woman who had a family that loved her madly and who accepted me as one of their own. What more could a guy ask for when looking for a potential spouse? When I took the big step, everything changed. Marriage, this word itself causes a paradigm shift in normalcy for women. Everything you knew just goes out the window, and something else takes over a woman's brain, turning it into something resembling a 100-hour traffic jam. Once she felt secure in our relationship, the true nature of how their family worked became apparent to me. My mother-in-law was the undisputed matriarch of the family, directing the actions of the others with a command that was never questioned. She was in charge and controlled everyone. Although it annoyed me, I thought that we were sufficiently removed to remain unaffected by her tyranny. I was wrong. Like I said, my life was good, and then one day, everything changed. It was a very normal Friday morning, and I was immersed in magazine articles, 2 televisions, my phone, and 3 laptops. This was a normal thing for me, but if someone walked in on me, they might think I was possessed, obsessed with sports, of course. Honestly, besides my wife, sports were my passion. There were times when she asked me who I loved more, her or hockey. Of course, it was always her, and I believe she knew it. It was just a matter of what she wanted to hear. I think I had just finished my last sip of coffee when the phone rang. It was Shannon. "Hey, honey, what's wrong?" I told her, flipping through the magazine as I spoke. "John, put down the magazine. I have something crazy to tell you." The magazine fell from my fingers at the tone of her voice. This was no ordinary call. "Shannon, are you okay? Everything okay?" I muttered, my nerves starting to fray. I started to get up from my mess on the floor. "It's okay, baby," she assured me, her voice a little more even. "I just have something that can't wait until later." Okay, I said, not knowing what was important but feeling a little relieved that she was okay. Shannon sometimes had a tendency to dramatize things, especially on the phone, but nothing could have prepared me for what she said next. "Well, the thing is," she hesitated, seeming to struggle to find the words. "Well, I'm pregnant." Silence on both sides. Shannon and I had tried to get pregnant for 3 years of the 6 years of our marriage. We spent half of them trying to have a child and seemingly not making progress in our endeavor. You've heard this routine before: a couple tries to get pregnant, finds out one of them has a problem, tries treatment, considers alternatives, and eventually gives up on the dream. Shannon had problems. I won't go into detail, but the gist was that it was unlikely she would be able to get pregnant. It was a possibility, just an unlikely one. These cards had been played. We hadn't completely given up, we just changed our thinking a little. My attitude was that intim was fun, we both loved it. We simply lowered our expectations and moved on with our lives. Honestly, I never expected us to get pregnant. In my mind, although I never said it out loud, it was a foregone conclusion. I don't know what Shannon really felt because we didn't go into it, but I have to imagine that she was also shocked by this turn of events. "Are you sure?" I asked awkwardly, not quite understanding what was happening. Shannon's beautiful laugh filled my ear as she gently chided me. "Baby, do you think I would tell you this if I wasn't sure?" She was right. I knew she would never even joke about such a topic given our history. We spent the next 20 minutes on the phone, crying, laughing, making plans, and loving each other. It was one of the happiest moments in our relationship, and for the first time in almost 3 years, we dared to dream about the family we wanted so much. After Shannon hung up and went back to work, I tried to focus on my task, but I couldn't concentrate. After an hour of no progress, I packed everything up and decided to finish later in the evening. After Shannon and I had talked, Shannon returned home earlier than usual that day. As expected, we hugged, cried, and celebrated together. The whole weekend was like a dream, like something out of a melodrama. I think we sat next to each other in the clinic on Monday morning, waiting for the results of her pregnancy test. Shannon had taken 5 home pregnancy tests over the weekend, and although it was obvious she was pregnant, we needed to hear it from the doctor and find out how far along she was. The doctor confirmed that she was in her 5th week. It really surprised me that she had reached this point without realizing she was pregnant, but to be honest, she had almost no symptoms. What tipped her off was a frequent urge to urinate and a slight swelling in her breasts. She bought the test on a whim and took it right away. At work, we left the clinic smiling from ear to ear, Shannon holding my hand as we crossed the parking lot. We were happy. We were always happy together, but our dream was to create a big family. Now we had hope for this dream. For some reason, the universe didn't love me, that's how I felt. It seemed like when something was going absolutely right, the universe would throw me a curveball that would make me lose my balance. Shannon and I spent the next 3 weeks planning the baby's room and buying the first baby things. We were constantly excited, deliriously happy, and excited to buy probably more things than we needed. my favorite purchase was the cute little towel set. It made me feel good just to buy something. But as always happened to me, it was then that trouble decided to overtake us and steal our happiness. No, she didn't lose the baby. That's the irony of this whole story. We knew that Shannon's little sister, Ashley, had been sick for some time. It was a difficult time for her family and had been for about a year. Unfortunately, Ashley's kidneys gradually failed, and she would eventually need a transplant. She was relatively high on the list, but she had a rare blood type, which greatly reduced her chances. The doctors couldn't give us a real timeline other than to say the sooner, the better. But we all thought she had about a year until she completely failed. We chose to believe that she would receive a new kidney before that. The call from Shannon came to me in the early afternoon, and I immediately knew something was terribly wrong from her panicked voice. My first thought was the child. "Oh my God, John, Ashley has been hospitalized and it's not good," she shouted into the phone. "I'm heading to the hospital now. Can you come and be with me, please?" she begged desperately. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said quickly, gathering my things. She was right, it wasn't good. Something went wrong very quickly, and it seemed as if her timeline had sped up several times. Shannon was beside herself. She was practically inconsolable for the first half hour that I was around. Ashley had been stabilized but would likely have to remain in the hospital full-time until she received a new kidney. This was the hardest thing for Shannon. It made everything very real for her. I was walking down the hallway toward Ashley's room one evening and stopped when I heard Shannon's voice from the small dining room nearby. She spoke to my mother in a hushed tone, and as I was about to enter, I heard the word pregnant and froze. We hadn't told her family she was pregnant because she was at risk, and we were only 8 weeks along. We didn't want to rush and tell our parents, then regret it if the pregnancy stopped. I wasn't one to eavesdrop, but today something made me stop and listen. "Oh my God," said her mother. "How long?" "About 8 weeks, Mom." Something was wrong here. Her voice trembled and was filled with anxiety. She almost sounded sad. This is not how we planned to tell her parents that we have a miracle child. I knew for a fact that Shannon wanted to make it a big event with a gender reveal and everything. It was strange. This made me very nervous. "This is such good news, honey." "Why so sad?" her mother asked, clearly sensing Shannon's gloomy mood. "Mom," Shannon continued weakly, "I want to give my kidney to Ashley," she said, her voice filled with tears. "A what?" This was news to me. She certainly never indicated that she wanted to be a donor. My legs almost moved forward to enter the room, but something held me back at that moment. "Oh, honey, really?" her mother said, her voice also filled with emotion. "You know your sister would never ask for this, right?" "Yes, Mom, I know that, but she doesn't have to," Shannon quickly responded. "I always planned to be her last hope, secretly, of course," she added. "Oh my God, wait," her mother suddenly exclaimed, as if realizing something. "Yes, Mom, I know what that means," Shannon said gloomily. And then it hit me like a tidal wave of fear, pain, and panic. She was going to have a kidney transplant. It was a serious operation. A pregnant woman cannot undergo a kidney transplant. "Are you sure you want to do this?" her mother asked sternly. "I've been thinking about this all week, and I'm sure," Shannon said with sadness and determination in her words. "Did you tell John?" "Not yet, Mom," she said. "Honestly, I don't even know how to tell him about this." "Well, go home and tell him as soon as possible," her mother insisted. "If you're going to do this, you need to start preparing." "I will, Mom." "Thank you for listening and supporting my decision," Shannon said, hugging her mom tightly and starting another round of tears. I was absolutely depressed. I carefully walked away from the door and went back down the corridor like a zombie. I didn't know where I was going, but when I got into my SUV, I realized I wasn't going home. I needed to go and think. As I pulled out of the hospital parking lot, I tried to process what I had just heard. My wife planned to stop the pregnancy and give the kidney to her sister. She didn't even tell me about it, and it seemed like her decision was final, with me having no role in it. I won't lie, it hurt. It hurt more than I can put into words, so I won't try. Actually, I will. What I think hurt the most was that she chose to share her decision with her mother rather than with me, her husband, her life partner, the father of the child growing inside her. What was that doing to me? Did my thoughts and feelings matter so little to my wife that she would bypass me in making such an important, life-changing decision, as if I didn't have the right to at least speak out about it? We had been trying to have this baby for almost 5 years, and when we finally got a glimpse of our dream, she planned to abort it without even asking my opinion. Tears blurred my eyes as I drove and drove. I didn't even pay attention to where I was going. I also didn't look at the time. The ringing of the phone brought me out of my trance, and looking at the dashboard, I saw that it was 6 p.m. I had been driving for 4 hours and had no idea where I was. I looked at the phone screen on the seat. It was Shannon, probably already home, wondering where I was. She was probably also wondering where dinner was. I knew I couldn't meet her now. I couldn't look her in the eyes while she said she was going to do it. I was already falling apart, and she hadn't even told me. I decided to answer to prevent further calls and harassment from her. I'll just tell her that I'm in the office and need to stay late. I pulled myself together and pressed the answer button. "Hi, dear. How are you?" I asked unconvincingly. God, what can I tell her now? "John, where are you?" she asked worriedly. "I thought you'd be home. Did you go to the office or something?" Yeah, something just popped up a couple of hours ago, and I'm going to have to stay here late, unfortunately," I lied. I didn't feel an ounce of guilt for lying to Shannon given the current circumstances. "Oh," she said weakly, clearly disappointed. "Okay then, I'll make something for dinner and then go back to Ashley. Should I wait for you or not?" "Don't wait," I said with a little too much harshness in my voice. I think she sensed it but didn't comment. "Okay, honey. I love you," she said, her voice shaking slightly. She was probably thinking about what she was going to tell me when I got home. I didn't plan to be there for this conversation tonight, but I knew that this conversation would happen eventually, and this thought was killing me from the inside. "Love you too," I replied, hanging up. I drove for another 4 hours before I decided to return home. I must have circled the perimeter of the city a dozen times. Since I was in no hurry to get home and needed gas, I stopped at a gas station. While filling up the car, I noticed a couple leaving the store. They were laughing at something, and he hugged her, pulling her close to him. When she turned to me, I noticed that she had a pregnant belly. She must have been 7 or 8 months along. With a belly like that, I couldn't hold back my tears as I watched the loving couple flirt and carry on. I turned away to hide my face as they passed by. I felt betrayed. Was it fair of me, given the circumstances? It's not that I didn't care about Ashley's life. I cared a lot, but I felt that I at least deserved the right to speak on the matter, and apparently, I did not have such a right. Was Ashley's life less important than the life of our unborn child? It is not so easy, you see. The fetus growing in Shannon's womb was not just a baby we created together. This baby represented so much more to our lives than just that. This baby was our future, and she knew it. She should have known this. So it pained me to think that she was willing to give up our future in such a way. It was an almost impossible situation. Losing a family member is devastating and hurts more than anyone can imagine until it happens to you. I lost my mother, all my grandparents, and several aunts and uncles. I know what it's like to lose a family member. I felt like a jerk considering whether one person was more important than another, but when it came to choosing, I knew that I considered our unborn child more important than almost anyone else on this planet. The only person who was more important to me was Shannon herself. I started the engine, beginning the painful journey home. Will it even feel like home after this? It was 11 p.m. when I finally opened the front door. The house was quiet and dark, so I assumed she was already asleep. I had no desire to wake her up and potentially have this conversation, so I crept around the house, trying to remain as quiet as possible. Shannon was fast asleep when I slid into our bed. I heard her even breathing. I must have lay awake for an hour, my mind racing. I think I even went through a bit of a phase of denial, the thought that maybe I just heard them wrong and nothing would actually happen. But common sense brought me back to earth, and I knew what I had heard. Eventually, I fell asleep, but it was a restless sleep. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and breakfast greeted me when I woke up the next morning. I looked at the alarm clock, seeing that it was 9 a.m. It was too late for me. Shannon was bustling around the kitchen, apparently preparing a feast. I could smell the sausage and eggs, my favorite. She probably cooked all my favorite foods to prepare me for her big confession. My stomach churned. Gathering my courage for the upcoming conversation, I put on a t-shirt and headed to the kitchen. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Shannon greeted me, smiling. "What time did you come home?" "Good morning," I answered sleepily. Yes, she had sausage, eggs, bacon, toast, a full set. We tried to eat healthy most of the time, and breakfast like this was actually quite rare. She had to prepare me for the conversation. The last vestige of my appetite was gone. She handed me a cup of coffee, taking a sip herself. "I got here around 11, I think," I answered absently. She continued talking about her plans for the day while I listened and pretended to be interested. I wondered when she was going to tell me the truth. She finished 2 perfectly cooked eggs with a soft center, placed them on a plate, and presented me with the most delicious breakfast I had eaten in years. Honestly, it looked amazing, but again, I had no appetite. In fact, I felt sick just thinking about food. But I knew that she would not reveal her plans to me until I had eaten. "Let's get this over with already," I thought to myself, feeling as if I was being led to slaughter. I devoured her breakfast while she watched me with satisfaction. Her plan worked like clockwork. Of course, I can't be mad at her after she tried so hard to please me. I knew this was what she was aiming for. I thought I'd go take a shower before she went ahead with her plan. I stood up to put the plate in the sink when she said the words I hoped I wouldn't hear. "So, honey, we need to talk, and it's really important," she began with a tense nervousness in her voice. Here it is, I thought. I walked back to the kitchen island and sat down on the stool again. "Of course. What is it?" I asked indifferently. "I want to talk about Ashley," she said, her eyes watering slightly at the mention of her sister. I suppose she wanted to gain my sympathy. I nodded carefully, encouraging her to continue. She clutched her coffee mug, holding it tightly as if it were a lifeline. "Ashley will die if she doesn't get a new kidney," she said simply. Well, that was straight to the point. She was crying now, tears rolling down her cheeks as she poured out her soul to me. "The doctor said she might not last another 2 months, she sobbed, her body shaking with her sobs. "I can't bear the thought of her dying." "If there was anything I could do," she said, letting out a loud sob as her head dropped and tears streamed down her face. My heart was torn to pieces for her sister, and for us. I knew what was coming next, and I knew it would kill me to hear. "I want to give Ashley a kidney," she said with a determination and intensity one don't think I've ever seen in her before. Yes, she made a decision, and I was not part of that decision. Another round of sobbing began, and tears started to well up in my eyes. I don't know if she was hoping for an answer from me, but I was silent. I wanted her to say everything, and to be honest, I didn't have many words. I was completely stunned. Shannon met my eyes, and I could see into her soul. Her heart was breaking, and she was incredibly confused, but I also saw determination. I was waiting. "You won't say anything?" she asked, crying. I returned her sad look, searching her eyes for any sign that she might change her mind and not carry out this plan. I definitely didn't want to be the one to tell her she couldn't do it because then I'd be faced with a whole new problem. I knew I would never support her decision and that I'd have to tell her how I felt about it, but I didn't want to say no until she fully expressed herself. She stood in silence for a few seconds and then continued. "This is a decision that I have thought a lot about, and I have to do it," she said desperately, trying to get my understanding. I finally found my voice. So, just like that? I asked. My voice was surprisingly flat and devoid of emotion. I felt myself gradually closing off with every second. We both know what this means for my words were cut off when my eyes landed on the small bulge of her belly. Even in her second month, she was already showing quite a bit, especially in her tight yoga pants. The sight of her belly threatened to bring back the tears, but I held on for our child. I continued quietly, looking into her face again. Her body shook with sobs again. "Oh, John, I know," she said, her eyes pleading with me to understand. "I know this means more than anyone on this planet," she added, her eyes widening as her crying stopped at my words. I could tell she was shocked. "I think so," I said with bitterness in my voice. I felt my heart hardening every second. "John, this is the hardest decision of my life, but I can't watch my sister die," she said, her voice filled with pain and suffering. I saw that she was torn, but she did not see some things that were obvious to me. She seemed blind to the consequences of her decision. "So I have no say in this at all?" I asked, looking at her. I searched for something in her eyes that I could cling to and turn her away from her decision, but her expression changed and became stubborn. "John, this is my body," she said firmly, looking me in the eyes with a challenge as if daring me to tell her what she couldn't do with her body. Shannon was a feminist, and so am I. To be honest, we both believe that women should always have the right to bodily autonomy, but that's not what was discussed here. To me, the father of an unborn child in a loving marriage has every right to express his opinion about family planning. Shannon shared this view, but at this moment, she did not see it. Her devotion to her sister clouded her judgment. I knew I couldn't change her mind, but I made one last try. "Shannon, please don't do this. There has to be another way," I begged. My pleas were met with a mixture of stubbornness and sadness. She was torn, I saw it, but I knew that her opinion was final. Nothing I said would change it. "Sorry, John, I have to do this," she said, her eyes red from crying. She still silently asked for my blessing. I wasn't going to give it. We looked at each other for what seemed like an eternity, waiting to see who would give up first. My heart was closing off with every second. I felt my life slipping away. After maybe 10 minutes, I just got up and left the house. I couldn't be near her now. I heard her screaming my name as I walked toward the SUV. I didn't turn around. I saw her sad eyes looking at me through the window when I left. Again, I didn't know where I was going. My phone blew up for the next few hours, mostly with texts and calls from Shannon. I noticed there was one from her mom too. This is great, I thought. Now her mom is getting into my business too, how typical. I ignored all calls and messages. I couldn't talk to them now. It hurt too much that they all seemed to conclude that not only was Ashley more important than our child, but they also expected me to be okay with not having a say. Finally, around midnight, I pulled up to our house, hoping that Shannon had gone back to sleep. Bad luck, she was waiting for me in the dark living room, reading a book. She looked at me, her face full of worry and anxiety. I walked past her and headed to the bedroom, taking off my clothes along the way. She followed me in silence, clearly waiting for the right moment to speak again. I barely heard her words when she spoke, but they reached me as I was putting on my pajamas. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, never been better," I said bitterly. I threw back the sheets and slid into bed. "Let's go to sleep," I said with finality. She realized that I was not in the mood to talk and quietly slipped into bed next to me. I turned off the lamp and fell into a restless sleep. I felt her next to me, and at some point, she even tried to cuddle up to me, but my coldness was obvious, and after a couple of minutes, she pulled away. I spent Sunday doing housework and ignoring Shannon. I saw that she was hurt by my indifference, but I didn't care at all. I went about my business like a robot. When she prepared lunch for us, I politely declined as I still had no appetite. The next few days were much the same, and it weighed on both of us. Something had to happen eventually, but I didn't want to start it. I knew what would happen next. Shannon was especially excited before bed on Tuesday, so I knew Wednesday would be the day. I woke up Wednesday morning to see her quietly crying over a cup of coffee. After pouring myself a cup, I continued to ignore her. The knock on our door came all too soon and brought us both out of our trance. Shannon opened the door and spoke to my mother in hushed tones, mentioning my name several times. Then suddenly, she was standing in front of me, begging me to talk to her, to give her something. I looked into her eyes, conveying my pain to her silently once again. Then she just left and walked toward the door. I watched her walk away, hoping she would stop, but she didn't. "Please don't do this, Shannon," I pleaded, not too proud to beg her to stop, to listen to me, to see the mind. This was our last chance. She turned and looked at me sadly for a few moments, then shook her head and left the house with her mother. I watched the door close on our future and knew our marriage would never survive this. We were doomed from the moment she walked out that door. I cried, long and hard, sitting sadly at the kitchen table, thinking about all our relationships and how we got to this point. It hurt more than anything I had ever felt in my life. I was still sitting in the same place when she returned 2 hours later. Her mom just dropped her off. She didn't even go into the house with her. I don't know why. Maybe she didn't want to meet me, but I also didn't understand why she didn't help her daughter into the house. I knew what the procedure entailed and could see that Shannon was having a hard time physically. I couldn't look at her, but I knew that eventually, I would have to overcome my pride and help her. She needed someone, and despite my feelings for her and what she had just done, I couldn't leave her like that. Shannon went into our bedroom, and for the next 2 hours, I listened to her muffled sobs as she lay alone on our bed. I was lost in my thoughts, and my grief, was it grief? Had I already mourned our child? I doubted it had really sunk in yet. I wondered if Shannon was grieving the same thing. Logic and compassion broke through my pride, and I went to check on her. "What should I bring you from the store?" I asked her softly. "Did you take the day off from work?" She didn't answer right away. She just continued to sob quietly into her pillow, but eventually, she turned to me, her eyes full of tears, and extended her hands. She said she needed comfort. Despite my anger, I still loved her the most and couldn't help but take her into my arms. I held her as she cried on my shoulder for the next hour, and finally, she dozed off, exhausted from the exertion. She slept until late in the evening, and when she woke up, I was ready to rest. "I need to sleep," I said bluntly. When she woke up, rubbing her eyes, she nodded and looked at me with a look I couldn't quite understand. We briefly discussed what she needed for the next couple of days, but left it at that. I didn't want to discuss the emotional aspects of what happened between us. This would lead to pain and heartache. To her credit, I think she understood this and avoided the topic too. I suspected she desperately wanted my understanding and compassion, but I simply didn't have it available. We fell asleep again, and although she snuggled close to me and I allowed that closeness, we were as far apart as we could be. She took something from us and gave it to someone else. I knew I would never be able to deal with it, and this realization destroyed my soul. The next 2 weeks passed relatively calmly. We became accustomed to our discomfort, if at all possible. We were more like roommates than husband and wife. I took care of her physical needs. We cooked dinner, mostly ate together, and discussed finances and household chores. The only difference was that we slept in the same bed. There was almost no intimacy between us. Shannon tried to hug me from time to time, and although I didn't refuse, I didn't respond with much emotion. She caught on to this, and the hugs became less frequent each day. We didn't kiss again, which hurt, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it, and we, of course, did not have intimate contact. I thought we would never have it again, but that was probably because I knew deep down that we were done. What was the point? It was a gloomy Sunday, and Shannon had just returned from a doctor's appointment with her mom again. Mommy Dearest made arrangements and dropped Shannon off without making an appearance at our house. To be honest, I was glad. I had no desire to communicate with my mother-in-law now. "I'm going to have surgery this Wednesday," she said softly, standing behind me. I was busy putting away the dishes when she came into the kitchen. Right, transplant operation. I should have expected this to happen soon. Apparently, this means she will need a trip to the hospital, and I will most likely have to stay the whole time. I suspect she will spend the day under observation there. Can you give me a ride and stay until it's over? She asked hesitantly, wringing her hands. I looked at her and knew that I would do whatever it took to make this happen. I had been thinking a lot over the past 2 weeks, and although I still felt betrayed, I knew I couldn't leave her now. I will help her through the surgery and recovery period and make sure she is okay. You can count on me to give you a ride and stay with you, I said, fighting back tears. Her eyes immediately filled with tears, and she threw herself into my arms, clinging to me. Thank you, she said through tears, and I even felt a note of joy in her voice. She probably thought this was the path to healing and forgiveness in me, but I knew better. I decided not to ruin the moment as I knew she needed to be in a good mood before her surgery. We could sort out our marriage after she was restored. The procedure went smoothly, and she recovered fairly quickly. I saw her parents several times during the 2 days we spent in the hospital, but we didn't talk. The silent hints were enough for us to understand that we were not on speaking terms now. I even saw Ashley when she was brought in to meet Shannon before her surgery. I went out of sight. She'll be back to normal in 4 weeks, the extremely enthusiastic doctor told me before they wheeled her into the operating room. You'll have your wife back in no time. My lack of reaction and expression must have said a lot because his face changed from exuberant to confused, and he awkwardly shook my hand before walking away. Shannon was heavily medicated and tired, and when we got home, she was almost unconscious. I put her to bed and started cleaning the house. I had a lot of time to think over the next couple of weeks. Shannon spent most of her time in bed and on the phone with her mom, so I was mostly left alone with my thoughts. It took me about 2 weeks to think things through, but by the end of those weeks, I knew 2 things for sure. First, I will always love Shannon. Nothing will change that, neither this nor anything else in this life. She could literally stab me, and I would still love her. And second, I could no longer be her husband. The second one obviously hurt more than I can say. I did my best, I really tried my best, to find a way to deal with it, but there just wasn't one. I held too much resentment for what she did to us and how she did it. I was forced to say goodbye to our unborn child without a choice, no opinion, no attention, other than to tell me that everything had already been decided. How can I love her and not remain her husband, you ask? It's simple. Loving someone doesn't mean you have to be married to them. I loved a lot of people who hurt me, and even though I moved away from them, that love still remained. Shannon will simply be the last person on this list. Shannon gave up our future for her sister's chance at survival. I recognize that family ties are very strong and that her love for her sister inspired her actions, but that doesn't make them right in my eyes. There's a good chance we'll never be able to get pregnant again, and even if we can, the strain of this loss has taken a toll on our marriage, making it even less likely. It will never be the same. The point is, I knew I could never get over it, and it wouldn't be fair to her to stay married to someone who was only a shadow of what we once were. I will stay with her for the last weeks of her recovery, and when she is able to be independent, I will tell her my intentions. I came home from work one evening to find Shannon hysterically crying on the phone with someone. When she saw me, she quickly said goodbye to whoever was on the other end and turned to me. The transplant was a success. She'll be fine, she burst into happy, relieved tears. I felt a moment of joy for her and her sister, and in that moment, I truly felt relieved that everything worked out for Ashley. She will live a full life, uninterrupted by tragedy. It was a happy moment. We hugged, and she started crying again. I smiled at Shannon and said I was glad to hear that, and I was really happy. But unfortunately, this moment was short-lived, and the pain from our loss returned like a sharp knife in the heart. Shannon's joy knew no bounds that day, and although I was in pain, I tried not to spoil her happiness. I spent the next week meeting with a lawyer, recommended to me by a close friend, to discuss the division of the property and the path forward for us. I decided to file for divorce right away, instead of just breaking up with her and going through an even longer and more painful process. I needed to rip off the bandage and move on. Shannon made a little more than I did at my job, and I had no desire to take anything away from her. I asked the lawyer to draw up an agreement allowing her to keep everything that was hers, as well as all of our investments and savings. I planned to leave with just my income because that's all I really needed. I had already looked at apartments in the city and found some decent options that were pretty cheap. By the time she recovered, I would almost be ready to move. Shannon noticed my dark mood several times and asked me to talk to her, but I politely declined each time. I didn't want to upset her while she was still in pain and unable to help herself. I didn't want to hurt her at all, but I knew it was inevitable. One evening after dinner, she came up to me. "John, we need to talk about all of this, about what happened," she said desperately, her eyes pleading with me. "It's hanging over us like a dark cloud, and I don't know what to do." I could see that she was worried, and it broke my heart knowing that I was going to leave and hurt her even more. But I also knew I couldn't stay because that would be our reality, a constant cloud above us. She would heal in time and find someone to love and cherish her. It just couldn't be me anymore. "What exactly do you want to discuss?" I asked. "Well, that's it, I guess," she faltered. "I want to listen to you. I want you to tell me how you feel. I want you to be angry at me," she exclaimed, crying. "Anything but not this unbearable silence and tension between us." "It's interesting that you want to know how I feel now after all is said and done, Shannon," I said with a sarcastic tone. If she wanted to hear it, she would get it. This caught her off guard, and she was stunned by my words, but I think she realized it was true. She never listened to me when it was important. "From my point of view, it doesn't matter how I feel right now," I continued, "because it seems like my feelings didn't matter when you made that decision without me." My words hit her like a slap in the face, and she recoiled, her eyes filled with tears. I truly believe that for the first time since she decided to do this, she understood the consequences of leaving me out of her decision. And now she would understand the consequences of her actions. "Oh God," she sobbed between words. "What have I done?" Her body shook with heavy sobs as she stood in the middle of the kitchen. She felt everything now. I think she realized that the damage had been done and it would be nearly impossible to undo. She also saw the grief and sadness on my face as I stood there. "I need to go out," I said quietly as she continued to cry. I promised Jeff I'd help him finish his deck tonight. Jeff was my boss and the creator of a fantasy sports website for which I did statistics. I gave him advice on doing his own repairs on his property. Shannon looked at me through her tears and simply nodded, turning to go into the bedroom. I knew I had to end this soon because the pain would destroy us both. "I'll wait a week and then sit down and explain everything. This will be the hardest thing I've ever done, but God help me, I'll do it." When I returned 3 hours later, I saw my mother-in-law's car parked in our driveway, and I knew it was going to be bad. The house was quiet when I entered, which was unexpected, but then I heard their voices outside and realized that they were on the terrace. I had no desire to talk to any of them, so I tried to quietly sneak into the bedroom. But it was not meant to be. I had only been in the bedroom for a couple of minutes when the door creaked open behind me. Assuming it was Shannon, I spoke without turning around. "I'll be up early tomorrow and can take you to your final checkup at 7, I said. "You have the nerve to treat my daughter so cruelly when she is going through such a difficult period," a voice said from behind the door. She was the one who spoke of impudence, barging into my bedroom, into my house, and making judgments about things that were none of her business. "Get out of my house," I replied, my voice remaining level but leaving my sincerity undeniable. I don't think she fully understood the danger she was in because I suspect she didn't realize how involved she was in ruining my life and my marriage. If I had ever come close to physically harming a woman, it would be now, at this moment with my mother-in-law. She stood stubbornly in the doorway, apparently trying to intimidate me. I didn't even give her the satisfaction of turning around, so I simply repeated my demand in the same tone. "Get out of my house right now," I said again. She must have realized that I wasn't going to argue with her and that she had no advantage here, so she turned on her heel and walked down the stairs. When I came down about 20 minutes later, she had already left, and Shannon was sitting alone on the couch. "You think you could get your mom to bully me into talking to you, huh?" I asked, disturbing her thoughts. She looked at me, her face covered with tears and her eyes swollen. She must have cried a lot. Her mom probably told her what an idiot her husband was. It must have been a bitter pill to swallow. Her silence told me I was right. I wondered how henpecked her father would have to be for these women to think that I would just accept this as my reality. I'm sure it was her mother who convinced her that my opinion didn't matter in such things. After all, it's her body. I wondered if she still believed it. The rest of the evening passed with minimal communication, and we went to bed under the same dark cloud. The tension was palpable, but no one said a word. The doctor told us exactly what I expected, that she was fine and could return to work and her daily life. Great, I thought. Time to put all this behind me and try to put my life back together. I talked to Jeff and asked him to take the rest of the week off. I knew it would take me a while to get things done, and work wouldn't allow me to do that. "Is everything okay, John?" he asked with a worried look. "No, Jeff. Things are really bad on the home front," I replied with a sadness in my voice that caught me off guard. I haven't talked to anyone about this issue except Shannon, and even to her I've talked very little. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I didn't care. Jeff was a good man and saw that I was struggling. "Take as much time as you need, John," he said sympathetically. "Come back when you've figured it out." "Thanks, Jeff," I said, grateful to have such a good boss. "But I'll be back to work on Monday." Shannon worked half a day at her job this week, so she was already home when I arrived early in the afternoon. I spent the morning with my lawyer, and he gave me the final draft of the divorce papers. She spoke before I could take off my jacket. "Ashley has recovered from surgery and will be released from the hospital today," she said with hope in her voice. She probably wanted me to be happy for them or something, and I was really happy. But I didn't like that their happiness came at the expense of mine. "Well, it looks like you succeeded," I said with bitterness in my voice. She recoiled from my words, clearly shocked by my coldness. I think she was surprised by my attitude towards all this. I sat down opposite her and looked at her for a long time, wondering what our lives would look like in a week, a month, a year. Everything seemed gloomy. It made me so sad. After what seemed like hours, I finally broke the silence with words I never thought I would say to Shannon. "I'm going to leave you soon," I said, my voice so quiet that I wasn't even sure I said it. Shannon's face showed confusion at my words, trying to make sense of them. "Are you going out again tonight?" she asked. "No, Shannon," I said firmly. "I said I filed for divorce and I'm going to move out." My words hung in the air for a few seconds before Shannon's face scrunched up, and she sank into agony as she realized my meaning. "No," she began to cry quietly, "sounds. This can't be true," she exclaimed, her face falling into her hands. I sat glued to the chair, watching as Shannon sobbed into her hands, her body shaking with heavy sobs. I wanted so badly to take her into my arms, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. We were too far apart. It would only complicate things in the long run. After a few minutes, she raised her swollen eyes to me. "How can you leave me after 6 years of marriage and everything we've been through?" she begged. "Are you just going to throw it all away? One day maybe after therapy you will understand that it wasn't me who threw our marriage away, Shannon," I said calmly, with true compassion in my voice. It broke my heart to see the woman I loved in such despair. I understood that it was I who made the decision to leave, but as I said, I felt that it was the only option. "We can handle this, John," she begged desperately, asking me to reconsider my position. "I'm so sorry, John. Please, please give me a chance to make things right." "How do you plan to fix this, Shannon?" I asked, becoming more and more angry at her lack of understanding. "Are you going to find a time machine and go back so you don't have to do this?" I shouted at her, losing my self-control. Or at least ask my opinion before you ripped my heart out of my chest. I was furious, all the pent-up frustration came out. Shannon was hysterical, but I couldn't contain my feelings any longer. Maybe I could live with this if you would just respect me enough to ask me, make me feel like I have a voice in this, I said. But unfortunately, it seems like your mom had more of a say in this than I did, and that's why I can't stay with you. I paused, giving her time to absorb my words. I calmed down and continued, so I'm going to make this really easy for all of you. I'll leave, I said in a flat tone. Neither of you will feel awkward anymore. John, please tell me this isn't happening, she cried, probably hoping that this was just a nightmare from which she would wake up at any moment. She knelt in front of me, clasping my hands in hers. It's over, Shannon, I said, determined to end it. There's nothing left for me here, I said, tears streaming down my cheeks. I pulled out a manila envelope from behind my back and placed it on the table next to her. Read them. Have a lawyer look at them if you want, but I'm sure you'll find them fair, I told her as she began to cry again. Please don't fight the divorce, and let's just get this over with, I said quietly. Give me the opportunity to move on with my life. With that, I pulled my hands out of hers and stood up from the chair, leaving her on the floor. I again had the urge to console her, but I resisted. I have an apartment in the city. I'll text you when I come to get my things, I said, standing at the door. She didn't turn around. I'll leave everything for you. I'll take only the essentials and some things from the barn. I'll pick up the rest later. I left her in the living room, still on the floor, and closed the door behind me. For the last 6 years of my life, 6 years I'll never get back, 6 years that I felt like I just wasted, I poured my soul into this marriage, this house, this life. I didn't even know that I would stay with this. Shannon was struggling with the divorce. She did everything she could not only to fight it but also to convince me to return to her. I saw it coming because I knew her, and I knew she wouldn't give up just because I asked. She most likely consulted her all-knowing mother, and I bet her mother told her to fight. She probably said that I would eventually come back to her. For some reason other than my understanding, Shannon always seemed to believe her mom. She believed whatever came out of her mouth. It was so sad. I hope, for her own good, she will one day break this connection and become an independent person. Shannon, along with her parents, called me on the phone every week, demanding an explanation. I only answered Shannon's calls if they were important. None of them knew where I lived, and I was glad of that. According to my lawyer, Shannon had indeed found herself a lawyer. However, this was only to inform me that she would not sign the divorce papers unless I agreed to meet her in person. I figured if it would get her to sign the papers, why not? It was a month and a week and a half after I gave her the papers when we met to talk. We agreed to meet at my lawyer's office, and it would be just us, without the presence of lawyers. Shannon was already there when I arrived, and I admit when I first saw her, I barely recognized her. She had lost at least 10 kilograms and looked like a broken person. She wore loose jeans and a sweatshirt, which was very unlike her. Her eyes followed me as I walked to the chair opposite her. There was a deep sadness in them, serving as a stark reminder of the gravity of what we were going through. I sat down, and we looked at each other without saying a word for several minutes. She opened her mouth several times to say something but stopped every time. Finally, she spoke in a hoarse voice. I've rehearsed what I'll tell you hundreds of times in my head, but there are so many things that I don't know where to start, she said, laughing at herself. I waited for her to continue since she was the one who requested this meeting. The first thing I want to tell you is I'm sorry, she said. I'm sorry for disrespecting you, for leaving you in the dark, for hurting you so much, and most importantly, for ruining an almost perfect marriage, she said, tears filling her eyes. At that moment, tears began to form for me as well, bringing back all the pain of the past months. I want you to know that I didn't come to you with excuses, she said. But now I see that I failed you. I failed us. I put others before you, let my feelings cloud my judgment, and let other people influence me, she admitted, seeming to be going through a mental checklist. Indeed, she must have rehearsed this several times. I told myself many times that I wouldn't beg you for a second chance, but now that I'm here and looking at you, I have to try, she said desperately. John, if you give me a chance, I will spend the rest of my life trying to fix this, making sure you remember why you fell in love with me, she begged. I want us to go to counseling and find a way to get through this together. I was silent, thinking about her words. On the one hand, there was a part of me that wanted to give her a chance, give us a chance. She was right, I loved her, and that would probably never change. But on the other hand, I knew it would never work, and counseling would likely end up being a series of tearful crying sessions. I would never be able to forget what happened, and it wouldn't be fair to her. Shannon made an impossible decision, but unfortunately, that decision did not include me or our marriage. Please, John, I'll do anything, she begged. To be honest, Shannon, I don't see how this will change, I said sadly. You see, the damage has already been done, and neither you nor I can undo it ever, I emphasized. Her eyes filled with tears at my harsh words, and her head fell. I know what I did, and I'm really, really sorry, she sobbed. It will never be the same, but maybe one day you can forgive me, she said, pausing. I can't bear the thought of life without you. Her words brought tears to my eyes but also reminded me of the reality of my situation. I couldn't forgive her. She made a conscious decision to disregard my feelings and terminate our pregnancy, knowing it was all for both of us. I understand that this was not an easy choice for you, which caused strong emotions. However, you independently determined your future path in life, which does not involve my presence, I said. Sometimes life circumstances force us to make extremely difficult decisions, the consequences of which may differ from our expectations. Several minutes of silence passed between us as Shannon cried quietly, processing my words without responding. I think she felt like she needed to listen to me since this was the longest conversation I'd had with her since I served her with the divorce papers. I'm so mad at you, I said, looking straight into her eyes. I'm angry at you for deciding that our future is less important than your sister's, and I really hate that feeling, I added, for obvious reasons. Because of this fact, I couldn't stay with her, I would always be resentful, and I didn't know if this resentment would ever go away, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. She cried openly as I poured out my soul to her. It was a heartbreaking moment to see her in such despair. Go to your family, Shannon, and try to find a new path in life, I said, hoping to end this conversation. The more I looked at her, the more I missed her and wanted to forget about the pain she caused. I really wish you the best and hope you find some peace, I said, standing up from my chair. Please sign the papers and give me the opportunity to move on and find peace too. She continued to sob into her hands as I walked out the door and out of her life. I never looked back. Shannon signed the papers that week but insisted on keeping a portion of our investment. She thought it was unfair to take everything. I told my lawyer that we could work this out off the record another time, but just to file and finalize the divorce. Shannon's mom did make one appearance a month before the divorce was finalized. She showed up at my workplace, somehow sneaking past the front desk and storming into my office. I just looked at her face and didn't say anything until she left. When the divorce was finalized, I had actually planned to move somewhere to start my life over, but a new opportunity at work found me before I could leave, and it was too good to pass up. So life went on, and I continued to live in my tiny studio apartment, focusing my energy on work. My job was still related to sports, but it paid much better. I could afford a larger apartment, but I had no reason to move out of my current one. I didn't need to impress anyone, so it just wasn't in my plans. I haven't really dated. My friend Jeff once set me up on a blind date, and although the girl seemed great, I wasn't in the mood, and the date ended pretty early. I think she sensed my emotional unavailability and stopped everything before it got awkward. It had been 3 years since my divorce was finalized, and I still missed her. It wasn't as bad as the first terrible year, but she still lingered in my mind. Sometimes I thought to check on her, but I always realized it was no longer my business, so I left her alone. One day, while running an errand for my boss downtown, I saw her. More precisely, I saw them. They were walking toward me along the sidewalk, about 50 feet away. Yes, Shannon was apparently with a new man. It shouldn't have surprised me, but it was still a shock to the core. It was obvious that they loved each other very much, by the way she held his hand, the way he looked into her eyes when she smiled at him, but most of all by the noticeable belly she showed. She was probably in her 7th month or so. She looked graceful, elegant, and radiated light. My heart broke into a million pieces in those seconds when I recognized her. I knew I had no right to worry about her anymore since I was the one who left, but damn, it still hurt so much to see that pregnant belly. It just reminded me of what I once had and lost. It also hurt that she seemed to move on so easily while I never could. I didn't want her to notice me because it would hurt even more. Having her look at me with pity would destroy me completely. I tried to take cover in the doorway before she saw me, but as luck would have it, she looked in my direction, and our eyes met. As soon as I reached the step, I had no choice but to keep walking and hope she didn't speak to me. She didn't say anything. Why would she? She was with a man, but I received a pitying look and guilty eyes. I don't even know how to describe the look she gave me, but whatever it was, it sealed my fate. I should have left, I thought to myself. That's why I wanted to leave the city. I walked past them without acknowledging them and continued walking. I forgot about the mission I was sent on. I reviewed my life over and over again, trying to figure out where exactly I had gone wrong, what cruel act I had committed for karma to haunt me with such vengeance and ruin my life. I walked so long and so far that when I reached the edge, it took me by surprise. The fence stopped me, and here I stood on the very edge of the highest bridge that connected 2 cities. I was surprised to be here, but at the same time, I felt like I had finally found the peace I had been craving. It was very peaceful as the sun set on this beautiful day. You'd think I'd have some last words to the universe before I left, but I just didn't feel the need to. Everything had already been said. This was my fate, and I accepted it with open arms. Shannon, my cup of tea rested precariously on my almost 8-month pregnant belly. It was actually funny how my eating and drinking habits changed as I entered my 3rd trimester. I often found myself in rather compromising and sometimes dangerous positions. What is it like with a hot cup of tea threatening to spill if the child kicks again? I was sitting in the living room, enjoying a quiet evening with my boyfriend Tom, when my phone rang. "Honey, could you be the best boyfriend in the world and bring me the phone?" I asked with feigned sweetness and charm. Tom, wonderful man that he was, catered to my whims these days. He was good to me, better than I probably deserved. To be honest, his attitude was that since I was carrying his child, it was the least he could do. Tom handed me the phone and took away the dangerous cup of tea so I could concentrate. There was a number on the phone screen that I didn't recognize, but since I often received calls from unfamiliar numbers at work, I decided to answer. "Hello?" I said in a cheerful tone, no matter who it was. I wanted to lighten the mood. The line was silent on the other end, and for a moment, I thought the call had been disconnected or something. "Hello?" I repeated. Hi Shannon. This is Angela," the voice on the other end said quietly. "Angela? Did I know any Angelas?" Then it dawned on me, Angela, John's mom. Why was she calling me? "Oh my God, Angela, how are you?" "It's been so long," I said with delight. It had been about 3 years since I heard from John's mom. She had called me to arrange to pick up some things from the house that John hadn't taken with him, wedding photos and a few gifts and memorabilia we'd collected over the years. He had said at the time he didn't need them, but Angela thought he might regret not taking them later. It really hurt me that he didn't want anything out of our life together. I was happy that Angela came to pick them up for him and hoped that he kept at least some of them. "Yes, it's gone, hasn't it?" she said with deep sadness in her voice, and I detected some uncertainty when she spoke. "Shannon, I'm calling to tell you," she hesitated again as if she couldn't find the words. Her silence lasted almost half a minute, and now I began to worry. "What happened, Angela?" I asked, afraid to hear her next words. I'm calling to tell you that John passed away 2 days ago, she said with bitterness in her voice. The hammer fell on my heart. Oh God, no, I said to someone upstairs. I must have turned pale as I sat there, clutching my phone and hoping it was just a nightmare. Tom knew from the expression on my face and my voice that something terrible had happened. He looked at me with sympathy in his eyes but knew better than to come near me. I saw John just a few days ago when I was walking through the city center. He walked past me with indifference, and although I wasn't expecting a conversation, it hurt a little that he didn't at least acknowledge me. I really felt bad that the first time I met him after our divorce was when I was 8 months pregnant. I think we both assumed at the time that I would never be able to get pregnant again, given what our chances were to begin with. But here I am, beating all odds. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous during the first trimester, coming to terms with the fact that I was pregnant with a child who wasn't John's. It took many grueling sessions with my therapist. Please tell me this isn't true, I begged Angela. Could he really have died in those 2 days that I didn't see him? What could have happened? It's true, Shannon, and I'm very, very sorry to be the one to tell you this, she said with a kindness that I once so appreciated in her. We didn't see his parents often since they lived in another country, but when we did, it was always special to me. I asked her what had happened, and she somehow dodged the question, giving me some vague explanation about an accident, but it didn't matter because he was no longer there. That's what really got to me. The main reason I'm calling is because he mentioned you in his will, and we're having the reading with our lawyer next week, she told me through my quiet sobs. Oh my God, am I in his will? Why? I asked, shocked. There's absolutely no pressure or expectation, but the funeral is tomorrow at 3 p.m. I will email you all the details, and you can decide if you want to be there, she said again, surprising me with her kindness and attentiveness. I wasn't sure if I could handle it. It would hurt so much. I don't assume to know what's going on in your life or where you are now, but I know that John meant a lot to you at one time. My opinion is that people who mean something to each other should always have the opportunity to say goodbye as they leave for another world, she said with emotion trembling in her voice. No matter what might have happened, she added, through tears and sobs. I thanked her. Thanks for letting me know, Angela, and yes, he meant a lot to me. He still means a lot to me. I was inconsolable for the rest of the day. Tom didn't ask, and I didn't tell. I never told Tom about John, there was no need. I didn't want to. John was a chapter in my life that I had closed and locked away in a deep, dark place. It was just a memory for me, but everything had changed. I was in his will, and God help me, I think I should be at that funeral. I don't know if this will set me back in therapy, but I think I need to. I have to explain everything to Tom. On the plus side, he took it in stride and said he was here to talk when I was ready. The funeral was small, in the sense that there were only 12 people present. I almost started to cry when I entered the small hall for the farewell and saw only a handful of people. How was this possible? John knew so many people, he was someone important. Before I could delve deeper into my thoughts, Angela came over and hugged me. She read my thoughts. It's okay, honey. We decided to limit the number of people present to only those closest to us, she reassured me. It made me feel so loved that she considered me one of those people. She glanced at my stomach, then looked back into my eyes and smiled faintly. Nodding at me, she said she was happy for me and proud of me. I almost couldn't cry, but one tear did escape. When she returned to her husband, the service was short. The coffin was closed, and I didn't have the courage to ask why. It still didn't seem that important, but I was a little curious about what had happened. I decided to ask his parents after the service. Angela somehow disappeared as people started to leave, so I walked up to John's dad outside in the parking lot. It was a tearful meeting of sorts, and he was just as kind to me as Angela was. What happened, Pete? I asked him, my voice trembling. He looked at me for a long time, considering his answer. He seemed to come to some conclusion and continued, "You'll find out anyway, so I'd better tell you the hard truth. John committed suicide, Shannon, he said, looking at the sidewalk as he saw my face begin to crumble. The next thing I remember is waking up on my back with a cold cloth on my forehead. I looked to my left and saw Angela next to my boyfriend Tom, and they were talking in hushed tones. I lost consciousness, that's what they told me. Tom took me home, and we talked. I told him about John. I told him everything. He sat and listened, and during the whole time, I never cried. I was almost emotionless, actually numb. Tom seemed to take everything calmly and with a kindness that I did not know he had. He put me to bed and sang to me until I fell asleep. The next few days were the same. I was insensitive to everything. Tom kept me afloat by simply reminding me to eat, sleep, and also attend the reading of the will. Only 4 people were at the reading of the will, not counting the lawyer, me, John's parents, and his sister April. The lawyer got straight to the point, listing the items John had left for his parents. These were mostly memorabilia and sentimental items, but John had a large collection of tools which he left to his father, along with a garage which he had opened as a side business. It was actually quite valuable. Then it came to money. It turned out that John had quite a lot of it. I was stunned. John left his sister April $250,000 in a trust fund, as well as several investments he had saved from our marriage. Then it was time for the lawyer to read what John left me. The lawyer read it, but I couldn't believe it. John was leaving me almost $10 million. Where did he get that kind of money? He also left me his business and website, with which I could do whatever I wanted. According to the documents, this was also quite a profitable business. In a letter to me, he said that I could sell it for a large sum if I wanted. When was this will signed? I asked incredulously. How long had he been planning this? April 19, 2017, the lawyer said. 2017, this was right after our divorce. Why did he divorce me and then leave everything to me in his will? I was puzzled and stunned. Why did he leave me all this money? I asked incredulously. I couldn't understand. He thought you would invest it in non-profit organizations, Angela said, turning to me. You've worked for a non-profit for as long as I've known you, and you're doing good work in the city. She continued, John knew you'd handle the money better than anyone else. Her words made me cry again, and I realized that she was right. Of course, this was exactly what John would have wanted. I left the reading of the will, once again stunned by silence and full of grief. I was afraid that grief would never leave me. It felt as if it had become a part of me forever, as if John would always be with me. I continued to live in almost every sense. I found a man who wanted to marry me and have children with me, leaving my life with John behind as much as I could. But there will always be a part of him that stays with me, and now I know it, a knowledge that no one but me had. John committed suicide the day we passed him on the street. I will never know what was going through his mind that day or how he felt when he saw me, but the fact remains that he took his own life after that, and this fact ate away at my soul. I never let anyone know what I knew or how it affected me. I hid it well. This was my cross to bear for what I had done to him all those years ago. What did I do to us? I discovered years ago in therapy that the root of my problems was not really me, it was my mother. She was a controlling, manipulative, evil woman who used those around her as a means to achieve her goals. I ran into her in the year following our divorce, realizing that she was the driving force behind my decision to terminate my pregnancy and help my sister. There were subtle hints and guilt trips that she used over time, and subconsciously, I succumbed to her plan. When John objected to my decision, my mother said that he was a controlling husband and was trying to steal my happiness. I believed her. It turned out that my little sister was my mom's darling, as I learned through therapy, and my own mother had tricked me into giving up my unborn child and my marriage to ensure Ashley's survival. She didn't care what happened to me as long as Ashley lived. I was glad that my sister was alive. I loved her. When I think about her now, I don't regret my decision. It's a funny thing, really. When I think about John, all I feel is regret about my decision. How is this emotional contradiction possible? I completely broke off relations with my mother 2 years ago and did not hear from her until 4 months ago. She found out through friends that I was pregnant. She called me, all happy, pretending that everything was fine and nothing had happened. She asked when I was due so that she would know when to come and be at the birth. Without any hesitation, I told her to go to hell and hung up. She will never meet my child now, not in this life, not in the next. She didn't deserve me, and she didn't deserve a grandson. I had a second chance at life. It wasn't the second chance I wanted, but it was good enough. I will never have the life I should have had, and I will have to live with it. I will raise my children and be a better mother to them than my mother was to us. This was my purpose. I liquidated all of John's assets over the next year and slowly distributed the wealth to a few really good organizations in the city. There were many tearful thanks that year. If I remember correctly, the whole thing totaled about $18 million. When it was all finished, John changed my life and my world. He is gone, and I will always miss him, but I used my time with John as motivation to be a better person and make the world a better place. Maybe one day I'll look in the mirror and feel like I did right by him. What do you think of our story today? In my opinion, the wife did the wrong thing because it would have been better to wait for a donor or to think of something else, but not to have an abortion. What's your opinion? Write in the comments. See you in the next video.